Hello everyone, today I want to show what is requestRenderMode and how it helps you to boost the performance. So what will be in this clip, this is a motivation, what is requestRenderMode from the blog about it, and we see a sandcastle example, my tips, what to do if it's not working, and in practice what to do. So motivation. So here an example, your application is dynamic, you got from a server position of ship, train, car, never mind 10 times in a second, then you update the position of the billboard or model, never mind, so you need 10 frames per second, not 60. And so how to do this? Here comes the requestRenderMode. So in simple words, it makes Cesium render the map only when user or developer explicitly ask to render. All you need to do is this line. In the constructor, you write requestRenderMode equal to true. Of course, you can do this also not in the constructor, and just type viewer.scene.requestRenderMode equal to true. Maximum render time change we will see it later, and this also later. When you want to explicitly render, you type scene.requestRender. From the blog, so Gabby gets from Cesium staff write an article called Improving Performance with Explicit Rendering. I recommend you to read it. And she tells that there are 7 scenarios when there will be a new frame. The new frame will be rendered only in the following scenarios. For example, the camera change, or you explicitly ask to render. And the question is what happens when you have a simulation, because when you have a simulation, you want the simulation to show, to move, to do something, and you don't want to be the simulation will freeze. So here's come the maximum render time change. When it's just from the documentation, you see this value defines a maximum change in simulation time long before a render is requested. Okay, we will see it will be clear when we'll see the sandcastle example. Now we use debug show frame per second in the development because if you do the requestRenderMode to true, and for example the maximum render time change is infinity, so no, you need to see that there are no frames. Of course that it's a DevTools you will see in frames, but it's in other thing. It's not the frames in the map. Okay, so if you did the requestRenderMode true and you see frames, that means something not work here, and I will show later what I recommend to do. Let's see the sandcastle example. So the sandcastle, I took the scene rendering performance. Okay, now here's what the debug show frame per second. It creates this box, and NA it means there are no frames. And we saw that when the camera changes, so need to be render new frames. Okay, so let's test it. Okay, you see there are frames rendering when the camera changes. Great. When I disable the correct render mode, so now the map is rendered in 60 frames per second. Okay, so there are some example you can play with them. For example, the picking. Okay, only when you can see it in the code that when the mouse hover on this box, so it explicitly asks to scene request render. The interesting example here is a XAML. You see here a satellite which here animated smoothly, okay, in 53 frames per second. But we told that in animation now we can say that it disables the requestRenderMode. So what we do, here comes the maximum render time change. Now it's on 0, and you can play with it 5, 7, 20. You see in 20 it's animate but a little bit slower. If I will type it infinity, so everything in the simulation will freeze. Okay, so go to this sandcastle example and play with it. Let's return to the presentation. Okay, what to do if the requestRenderMode true, but you see it renders frames in the box which I show you. So first, if you work offline, I sometimes work offline, so be aware that you loaded some imagery or whatever, because if tiles not loaded, it will render. Okay, in one case I removed that Cesium layer uh, to pass the statement below. Now why? Because this is a code in scene.js. If scene globe tiles loaded, if it's not loaded, then render requested to true, and it will render every time. So this more for if you work offline. Other thing is that if you use callback property can ruin the request render mode. So also put all the callback property in comment, and then you will understand. Maybe you will need to change the code and not use callback property if it important to you. Okay. If nothing works and you don't know what to do, so what I in one case I did, go open DevTools, search scene.js in the sources, and start to debug. What to debug? The file scene.js, and you see the function called render, and here you see we see before the scenarios when it will render, and you see should render requested if we are not in request render mode, if the camera changed, if we are morphing right now. So I debug this, and I found, for example, that callback property runs this, but after I debug this I come to this idea. And in practice, what I recommend to do, so for entities is the most simple, because I created an array of all my data sources which I use, simply all data sources names, and for each of them I iterate and I go to the viewer data sources, I get by name the data source name, and go to the entity collection changed. If the collection changed because you change the position of someone or the material, or never mind, I add an event listener and do my method called requestRender. Okay, the requestRender just calls the viewer scene requestRender, and that's all. Very easy for entities, but for primitive there are no such event. So my technique is when there isn't to update a specific primitive collection, because in primitives we have a lot of primitive collection. So I did, for example, I use in Angular an observable. So if I got a new position for let's say for my train, for my car, so I go to my primitive collection, I remove all, I add again the primitive with a new position, and then I call the viewer scene requestRender. Of course, you can call it recreate or update. Never mind this update map, but that's my point, and that's all.